Welcome to tonight's Tanya class. Tonight we are learning Perek Lamed Zayin, chapter 37, which happens to be quantitatively, it's a pretty big chapter, but it's a very, very important chapter. And the reason why this chapter is an important chapter is because, we all like to do things that we're going to see fruits from our labor. In other words, nobody wants to work, and nothing come out of it. I mean, sometimes it happens that way, but ultimately when we work, we want to see some production. We want to see something good come out of it. We want something to come out, and hopefully, obviously, it's good. So today, the author is going to explore, he's bringing it for you. The author is going to explore a very important concept, because since we will be more successful and we know that we'll be productive and how we'll be productive, so today we're going to learn about simple investing in the right things that are going to give you a real return and the greatest return. Welcome, come have a seat. They're going to give you a return and the greatest return. So what is that? So this is a continuation to last week's chapter. What did the author write last week in chapter 36? Last week in chapter 36, the author discussed the concept of that God had a desire. What was God's desire? To have a דירה בתחתונים, to have a dwelling place down here below. And we discussed last week at length. You can go back on YouTube and watch last week, chapter 36, that ultimately God wanted to create a reality where tachtonim means God's concealed. And when God is concealed, we will go ahead and reveal God by Torah study, prayer, and doing mitzvot. And when we reveal God, that will fulfill God's desire. And as the author explained last week, that what happens when we do that, we will merit to have God revealed. But the key thing is, when will we ultimately see and experience that ultimate revelation? Will happen when? When the Messiah comes, and when the dead will be resurrected. So in other words, the tachlit, hashleimut, the ultimate fulfillment of God's desire to have God revealed in the most lowest and darkest and concealed places of God and godliness. When will that come to fruition? That will happen when Moshiach comes. So in continuation to that, the author starts in this week's chapter 37, Perek Lamed Zayin, to discuss this idea that the ultimate revelation will happen when the Mashiach comes, or when the resurrection of the dead is. So he says that how does it come about? It comes about by the work. And he uses two terms, ma'aseinu, work, va'avodaseinu, which also gets translated as work. The difference between ma'aseinu, action, ma'aseinu is more action, and avodaseinu, work, is as follows. Action means that you do actions. So for example, you can do actions, and it's not really work. You're not exhausted, it doesn't go against your grain, it doesn't really bother you. You do the actions. Whether you're inspired or not inspired, you show up and you do the actions. So for example, you can do many mitzvot and stay away from transgressing just by rote and just by habit, whether you were trained yourself or you were brought up in that environment. And bottom line is, you can, on your scorecard, you can say, listen, I didn't do that wrong, I didn't do that wrong, I did all these right things. And guess what? You're going to get points for it. That is called ma'aseinu. That is called basically fulfilling the actions, doing what you're supposed to and not doing it not supposed to. That's one type of way of connecting to God, through ma'aseinu, actions. The other way is avodaseinu. Avodaseinu means I'm really not in the mood of doing it. As a matter of fact, I don't want to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. So that's called avoda. And that's basically the essence of Judaism. It's all about avoda, work. Means is the part that you're willing to do when you're doing that's great. That's wonderful. You will get rewarded for it. But where does the muscle start, flexing? Where do you start building real Jewish muscles? spiritual muscles. When does that get built? That's built when it's work for you. When you're really not in the mood of doing it, you do it anyway, or you're not in the mood of doing it, you stay away from transgressing. And that is called ma'aseinu avodaseinu. That's two categories the way we serve God. Now, when we serve God through ma'aseinu avodaseinu, by doing the actions and by doing the work that's considered real heavy, intense work, we cause that when the Messiah comes and the resurrection of the dead, God will be revealed. Now, what's the connection? So the Alter Rebbe says a very, very important concept, and that is as follows. He says, I'm going to say it in Hebrew and I'll translate. There's something which is called a concept in Judaism, schar mitzvah mitzvah. The reward of a mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. What does that mean practically? Very simple. Let's say, for example, you have a job or you have a business. So irrelevant what your job or your business is, your reward is not what you're doing. Your reward translates in modern America, it depends what part of the world you're living, it translates into dollars, shekels, liras, whatever the currency is. But here you worked, you did something, what do you get? You don't get the thing back. You get a second thing, a third thing, something you barter, etc. Here we're saying is, schar mitzvah means that the reward is the mitzvah itself. So in other words, it's not when you do a mitzvah, you're getting something else. What you're really getting is the mitzvah itself. So what does that mean, that the reward is the mitzvah itself? So the Alter Rebbe explains as follows. And he gives examples from all the four kingdoms that exist. In other words, what are the four kingdoms? I'll say it in Hebrew, I'll translate. Domem, Tzomach, Chai, and Medber. In other words, when God created this materialistic world, this physical world we call in the Hebrew terminology Olam Ha'asiyah Hagashmis, this materialistic world. So God created in the world itself, there's worlds before this, Atzilut, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiyah, which we call, so to speak, from the highest to the lowest, means Atzilus where God is more revealed. Bria already God is less, and Yetzira less, and this world where God is even less revealed. It's more of a materialistic world, what you see is materialism. But even in this materialistic world, there's four levels. What does that mean? There's the lowest level of spiritual energy is in the world of Domem, in this world itself, in this world of the world of Domem, which means inanimate objects. Tzomach, things already that grow, have more life to it, a tree, grass, plants, etc. Chai, which is animals. And Medber is the humans that have the power to speak, not only just verbal speech, because animals also speak, but we're referring to communication, which is again the whole discussion for itself. So in every one of these areas of life, we have an opportunity to do a mitzvah, and the reward of that mitzvah is the mitzvah itself, and I'll explain what that means. So let's take, for example, the Alter Rebbe gives an example from the world of Domem. So in this world, the place that has the least amount of spiritual energy is called Domem, inanimate. What's inanimate? The floor, sand, brick, etc. That's not the example the Alter Rebbe gives. The example he gives is, guess what? Something which is strange that everybody really idolizes, and it's probably the biggest idol in the world. What's the biggest idol in the world?
Money.
Money. There you go. Very good. Excellent. Money. So money, which if you think of what's money, silver, gold, the currency, right? A paper. Think about it. It's not Medber. It doesn't speak. It's not an animal. It doesn't grow. It's literally money is the lowest level of spiritual energy. Now, so money is money. That's all what it is. It's an inanimate object, whether it's whichever form you have it in, whether it's again gold, silver, paper. Today I think there's a new phenomenon called, it's not only today, it's not new, but what's the newest phenomenon of money? Plastic. Not even gold or silver. What inherent value is there in plastic? There really isn't. But in plastic, guess what? It becomes the monetary tool that we exchange, something which is called money, whatever money means. Okay, but that goes into the category of Domem. So Alter gives that as an example. So you have a pile of money. And again, the pile can be gold, silver, copper, any precious metal, paper bills, or plastic, whatever it may be. You have this heap of money. Which world is that in? Domem. So you have this money from the world of Domem. Now, it's sitting there. Guess what it's doing? Nothing. Nothing. It doesn't even smile at you. Some people have smiley faces on the dollar bills, right? But then you can't even use it, right? But the point is, it doesn't even, what does it do? Nothing. Now, so you take this domem, we're going to call it what it's called spiritually, this domem, this inanimate object, and you go ahead and you bring it to a charitable institution and you give it away for charity. Or you give it to a poor person and you feed a poor person with this inanimate object. What did you just do? You just elevated the domem. Now, what does that mean you elevated the domem? So there's three areas, three places that something gets spiritual life force. Three places. One place is from God itself. That means, for example, when you look and see God, which in whichever way, shape, or form, guess what? That's God himself. And that can be it can play out in many ways. If you look and see God in godliness, and you have the ability to see that, guess what? You're seeing God itself. In Kedusha, in something which is holy, what is the revealed energy that we see? We see God in godliness. Kadosh means it's holy. So if you see holiness, what do you see? You see godliness. Not concealed, in a revealed way. Now it's obviously hard to see it in this materialistic world, but there are cases where you can see Kedusha itself, and when you see Kedusha itself, guess what? You're seeing God without any masks. And obviously there's many, many layers and levels. But generally speaking, Kedusha gets its life force from what? From God himself. Then you have, since we started from Kedusha, we're going to go down the ladder. You have things which are in the world of neutral. Neutral means it's not good, it's not bad. So for example, the example we gave, money. Money is not God and godliness, even though ultimately everything's from God. But in talking in a revealed way, it's not God and not godliness. Could you say it's bad? It's not bad, it's just an inanimate object. So that goes under the category, in the words of Kabbalah, that goes under the category of something which is called Kalipat Noga. That's the name of it. What does Kalipat Noga mean? It's a shell. Noga means it's touching holiness, but it's not holiness. It's not impure, it's just neutral. Then you have something which is called Shalosh Klipot Atmeot, the three impure klipot, and that would be something which is forbidden. Like for example, a chazer, a pig, or anything else that the Torah forbids us to do, a forbidden relationship, right? So anything which is forbidden, we do not have the power to elevate, and as much as you try to sprinkle holy waters on something which is forbidden, that's coming from the three impure klipot, it's not changing. You're not going to elevate it. Because if God says you can't elevate it, you can do whatever you want. You can make 100 blessings, 101 blessings. Guess what? You still haven't elevated. And you're not going to elevate it. Because its energy is coming from where? From the three impure klipot. So again, so everything in this world gets its energy. Ultimately, everything comes from God, because even the three impure klipot come from God. The Kalipat Noga comes from God, but we're talking about the way God allowed the manifestation of his energy into this world. So it's either coming from God himself, like Kedusha, again, just to recap, or it's coming from Kalipat Noga, which is basically a neutral state, or it's coming from what? The three impure klipot. Now, so in our case, if something's holy, it's holy. You don't have to do anything. If something is impure, from the three impure klipot, there's nothing that you could do to elevate it. So just let it go. It means obviously if God in the Torah says, don't eat this, don't have to do with this person, don't go there, guess what? Don't waste your time. You're not going to elevate it. But we're talking about all the neutral things. And we're going to go through each kingdom, each spiritual kingdom in its own. So let's take, for example, money again. Money goes under the category of what? Where does it get its life force? From where?
Oh, giving it away.
No. Before you gave it away, where does money get its life force? In its natural state, in its raw state.
Dome.
It doesn't. No, that's what it is. But where does it get its
neutral, wasn't it?
Oh, very good. Yes, excellent. It doesn't get it from holiness, because it's not holy. It doesn't get it from the three impure klipot. It's a simple inanimate object. So it gets its life force from where?
Kalipat Noga.
Kalipat Noga. You don't see the apparent log. Kalipat Noga, very good. The neutral state. Now, when you go ahead and pick up this bundle of money, whether you pick it up with your hand, whether you write a check or you swipe a credit card, there's many ways to give things, virtual, right? But when you take this heap of domem and you transfer it over to a needy person or a worthy institution, whatever it may be, that goes under the category of tzedakah, charity, and you do that, you know what you just did? You elevated the source where the money gets its energy. It went from Klipat Noga to where now the money gets its energy from where? God. From holiness. So when you look at these dollars or plastic, whatever you look at, guess what? You see a godly energy in there. So you see godliness in there.
You released it from the shell.
Very good. Exactly. You released it from the shell, Klipat Noga, which is called the shell of neutral, and you brought it into the place of godliness and holiness. So that is one example of specifically the kingdom of domem. Okay. Then the Alter gives another example. He takes, for example, something that grows. So take, for example, there's a mitzvah that we all do once a year, and we have a commandment in the Torah to take the 4 species. So the specific species he refers to, it's called the mitzvah of the Etrog, right? You take the lul of the Etrog, hadasim rabot, and these are all items that grow on a tree. So these are on the category not of domem anymore. It's not inanimate. They actually grow. It goes in the category of tzomach, where it grows. And you take an esrog, right? I think in English it's called a citron, right? You take a citron, which is basically literally it's a fruit, right? That grows on a tree. Fine, grant you throughout the year. Interesting type of fruit. But you take this fruit. Now, before you take this fruit and buy it, or if you own the order, irrelevant, and it's growing on the tree, where is this fruit getting energy from? Is it getting energy? Well, everything comes from God. But again, through what vehicle? Is it godly energy exclusive? Like when you look at it, you see, oh, this is God? Huh? No, you see an esrog, right? You don't see God, you see an esrog. Now, let's go all the way to the left. Is it something which is totally impure? No. Unless, by the unless, there isn't, now the Alter already makes note of it, unless if it's from the years that you cannot have benefit from a tree. So then, since you can't have benefit, then it is getting its source not from a godliness or a neutral state. It's actually getting a source from an impure place. And therefore, if you take that estrog and try to use it, guess what? You can make 20 blessings, 100 blessings, 101 blessings. You will never elevate that estrog because it's from the years that you're not allowed to partake from that tree. Okay. So ultimately, where is the estrog getting its life force? Huh? Very good. Klipat Noga. It's getting its life force, again, not from holiness, not from impurity, from the neutral energy. Now, so you give a look at an esrog, neutral energy. Then you say, ooh, I like that one. I want to go to the guy that owns the orchard or whoever's selling that Etrogim, and you buy it from, irrelevant how much the cost is, you put down money, you buy it, now you acquired it to do the mitzvah, and you bring it to shul, to your sukkah and sukkot, and you make the blessing on the esrog. So you, at that moment, when you bought it, and then when you actually bring it to shul, and you finally consummate the spiritual energy, when you make that blessing on the lulav and esrog, all of a sudden, when you look at the esrog, it's not anymore a citron that grows on a tree. It's not an esrog that grew on a tree, which basically comes from a Klipat Noga. All of a sudden, what do you see?
Holiness.
Holiness. So you transfer, you did a transfer, I think in English it's called a transfer of assets. Here you're transferring the spiritual energy from where? From neutral to a godly state. So that's the second example the Alter gives. The third example he gives is take, for example, you want to have a mezuzah, or for example, tefillin, phylacteries. Or, for example, a Sefer Torah. The Torah. All these three things have one common denominator. Where do they all come from? Where do they come from?
God.
Everything comes from God. That's like the magic answer. But before we get to God, where does the parchment from the mezuzah, and from the tefillin, and from the Sefer Torah, where does it come from? Let's keep it simple. Let's not jump. Where does it come from?
The neutral.
You guys are jumping. Where does it come from? It comes from an animal.
Oh, okay.
Parchment? Yeah.
Parchment comes from an animal. It's the hide of an animal.
It is.
Okay. Oh, yeah, that's right. Papyrus is the other.
Parchment is from the hide of an animal. Again, there's different parchment. Again, we're not going to go into the technicalities, but the parchment comes from the hide of the animal. The mezuzah is written on one side, the tefillin on the other side, would split in half, etc. But that some are actually pieced together. But the point is that all three have the common denominator. They all come from where? From the parchment of the animal. Now, animal, we already did domem. What was domem? That was charity. Inanimate was charity. Tzomach was what the example was. The Etrog grows. And now we're up the ladder. We're dealing with an item that comes from where? An animal, from Chai. So you take, for example, this piece of parchment, and you say, I want to buy it, and you bring it to a scribe, or the scribe buys it, right? And you buy it from the scribe, let's say a finished product. So before the scribe made it into a mezuzah or tefillin or a sefer Torah, what was the parchment? When you look at the parchment, you see godliness? No, you see an animal. Is it forbidden? No, it's not forbidden. It's a piece of parchment. So it's Kilipat Nogah. Kilipat Nogah. It's neutral. It's getting neutral energy, clean slate, neutral energy. Yeah. What happens now? Once the neutral energy, when you go ahead and you transform it into a real mezuzah or sefer Torah or a tefillin, all of a sudden you look at it, what do you see?
God.
Now you see godliness.
Yeah,
Exactly. So in other words, so when you do a mitzvah with any of the three items we mentioned, what happens now? You elevated it from Kilipat Nogah to literally God and godliness. So in other words, we're going to pause here and we're going to continue soon with the medber. But I just want to, so you get the full picture. Again, we're making a break. We're going to continue with the medber in a second, the human beings. But let's take for a moment here. Let's try to grab this and get the full picture of it. So when you do any of these elevation processes, what happens now? You technically, what did you do in the process of giving something to charity, or taking the Etrog for a mitzvah, or taking the hide for a mezuzah or a sefer Torah? In one word, what's the common name of all of them? You did a what? You did elevated true, but what was the common, what's it called in Hebrew? We all know this word?
Mitzvah.
A mitzvah, very good. You all did a mitzvah. You did a mitzvah. Now, what's the reward? Here's the point. What's the reward of a mitzvah? The mitzvah itself. What does that mean? What does mitzvah mean? Mitzvah means that you're connecting to God. So the reward of the mitzvah is not that you're going to get paid something else. The reward is that you connected the money to God. You connected the Etrog to God. You connected the parchment to God, and now you see God. And when the Messiah comes, and when it's going to be the resurrection of the dead, and we're going to have beautiful vision that we're going to be able to see the infinite light, what are we going to see when we automatically look at the parchment? God and godliness, or the Etrog, or the Domem. So you see clearly that it's schar mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. So anytime a person does a mitzvah, what you're really doing is you're stepping up the basis from a neutral state to a godly state, and that's what happens through our actions and work in this world. When we ultimately get to see that in a real way is when the Messiah comes. Okay. So now you have the whole picture. Now we're going to go back and we're going to keep on going further into it. So we discussed domem, tzomach, chai. We're not finished. You think our work is done?
Never.
God doesn't give us an easy job. So he puts on the table. Now, to elevate domem, let me ask you a question, and you'll see how interesting it is. To elevate domem, we're not talking about your feelings about the charity, but we're talking about to elevate domem, to give this heap of cash, silver, gold, to a charity or to a poor person. What does it take? Huh? Yes, action. You move it over to charity, it's done. Voila, you did a mitzvah, you elevated it. Right? Wonderful. Now, to go ahead and create an opportunity for you to elevate the Etrog, that's work already. You got to plant, right? You got to pray, you got to put some water on there, you got to fertilize. It's a whole process. But eventually when you give it over, you elevate it. Okay, so you see already there's more work. Take, for example, a piece of parchment. Oh, it's a lot of work, right? You got to, what came first, the chicken and the egg. But ultimately you have the animal, you have to slaughter it, and you have to process it, and so on and so forth. And eventually you have to work out the piece of hide, and eventually you give it over to a scribe, and he writes it. and you finally put it up on the door, or in the tefillin, or in the Sefer Torah, and then you have it. Okay, so you see, as we get more higher energy, the work becomes harder. The avoda becomes harder. So now we're going to get to the highest level of avoda. And who is that? Yours truly, all of us truly, right? All of us. We are going to the category of what? Medber. Now, so this medber that we are, now, so let's define what we're talking about, because since we are such simple people, let's get a take here.
Some simpler than others.
Absolutely. So God created us like this, with a body. In our body we have a godly soul. In our godly soul we have an animal soul. Now, so let's get the players clear. The godly soul is what? Simple. It's
Godly.
godly. You guys got it. The godly soul is not part, it is God. Part me, but it's God. Period. End of story. Okay. So does the godly soul have to be elevated?
No.
Okay. It, generally speaking, doesn't have to be elevated. There is some discussion about that, but we're going to leave that for another time. But let's focus in on what we want to discuss for today. So you have the animal soul. The animal soul has to be elevated or not?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah, right? That's an avoda. That's an avoda, right? Okay. So now, when you want to elevate the animal soul, now you got to get to work. Now you got to get to work. So how do you get to work? How do you get to work to elevate the animal soul? The way you get to work to elevate the animal soul is very simple. I should take it back. I shouldn't say it's so simple. I mean, it's not easy, but the process is that when a person goes ahead and does a mitzvah, when a person does a commandment, or stays away from transgressing a negative commandment, what you're really doing is, because since now we're focusing on the person, on the human being, the person goes from, again, the animal soul, is it shalosh klipot hatmeot? Animal soul, is it impure? No, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to elevate it. Is it totally godly? No, because it's animal. So what is it? It's neutral. It's neutral. So every time you have an opportunity to fulfill one of the 248 positive commandments, and you fulfill it, what are you doing? You're elevating. You're elevating the thing you're elevating, but more importantly, who's the one that's elevating it? You're doing it. Does the godly soul do anything? No, it's godly. Who's the one that's actually going for? So, who is the one that's going and giving the charity? Who is the one that's actually working the Etrog to make the Etrog ready? Who's the one that's working the cow to make it for mezuzah at film? Who's the one doing it? It's the animal soul that's doing it. Now, whether he's happy or not, whether you paid him to do it, it's irrelevant. The fact is, as the animal soul participates in a mitzvah, you took the animal soul that was in a neutral state, and you said, "Ooh, this animal soul is acting godly." Fact. In other words, the animal soul, again, it's not impure, it's not holy, but when it acts and it does another mitzvah, so again, as it does the next mitzvah, what do you say? Where did its animal soul get its life force? Because the fact is the animal soul has to live. It's going to live either way. But where does it live from? Does it live from an impure place? No. Does it live from a holy place? No. It lives from a neutral place. But every time it does a mitzvah, what happens to the animal soul? Ooh. It's getting its energy where? From a godly place. Now, every time the animal soul really wants to transgress, natural thing to transgress, right? But it resists, it practices restraint, whether it's a skafi or a hapcha. What's happening now to the animal soul? It's elevating. It goes into a godly state. It goes into a godly state. Now, what happened when it goes to a godly state? So it leaves the place of the three klipot, and it goes into a godly state. Now, what's going to happen eventually? What's going to happen eventually when the godly soul continues to do mitzvot and to stay away, God forbid, from sinning? Not God, stay away from sinning. Stay away from, God forbid, sinning means he actually doesn't sin. He doesn't transgress.
It becomes more godly.
It becomes more godly. And that's a definition which says, and we actually say it, for example, every time we take out the Torah, it says, Ata hareis ladas, right? You were given to das, understand with das, which we spoke about in the JLI course, about the power of das. Ki Hashem hu Elokim, that God's God, and the whole world will see what? Godliness. Now, what happens when the whole world sees godliness?
They're elevated.
So 1 second. So where does the whole world will get its energy? From God versus the Kilipat Noga. Now,
And it becomes joyful.
correct. Now, so in other words, you see here how important it is to do what? To do mitzvot. Why? Because when you do a mitzvah, what's a mitzvah? It's a deed. It's an action. Every time you're doing an action, what are you doing? You're actually elevating the animal soul. Now, so the Alter says, hold on a second. If that's the case, that it's all about elevating the animal soul, so why do we have to study Torah? We should be machines. Mitzvahs machines, right? There's actually a group called the mitzvah machines, right? We should be a mitzvah machine. Give me another mitzvah. Okay, I'm not doing that mitzvah. If it's about elevating the animal, what are we saying in this chapter? It's all about elevating the animal soul. And because ultimately the Messiah comes, the more we elevate the animal soul, guess what? We're going to see more God. So what's the purpose of studying Torah? If it's all about the action. And the Alter says like this, even though generally speaking, that you study Torah, the godly soul studies Torah, but the reality is you also need the animal soul to study Torah. Why? Think about it. Because how do you study Torah? You use certain garments. Thought. When you study Torah, you have to think. Who's thinking? Not only the godly soul is thinking, the animal soul is also thinking. And not only that, we know when you study Torah, and if you really want to study Torah, how's the best way to study Torah?
Reading out loud?
Reading out loud, exactly. And matter of fact, it says if you study Torah out loud, it's going to last. Why is it going to last? Because the expression in the Talmud is akimat svasav havamai. So when you move your lips, it's doing an action. And when you do an action, it becomes like real and it gets locked in. Because if you just think Torah, that's okay, but it's not called learning Torah. Learning Torah is when you say the words, and when you say the words, it gets locked in. So when a person studies Torah with his thought and with his speech, it's also like an action. So therefore, it's not only important just to do mitzvot machine, so to speak, to bring godliness and God to your animal soul, but it's also important to study Torah, because by studying Torah you will elevate your thought and your speech, and also your whole intellectual faculties will be elevated. But still, so here we see the importance of what? Doing the mitzvot, because that will take your animal soul out of a neutral state to a godly state. When a person studies Torah, it will take your thought and your speech and your intellectual out of a neutral state to a godly space. But then the Alter says, if that's the case, the Alter is making a strong case. How important it's all about the action, and not only that, but even Torah study. What's the power of Torah study? Why? Because it's action, right? Your speech and your thought. So the Alter asks a simple question. He says, what happens? We know that the godly soul comes down to this world, and he wants to pray, and he wants to be connected to God with tremendous love and awe, and that's important. And here we're saying what's really important is the mitzvot. In other words, if a person prays and is dedicated spiritually and is in love and awe with God, that's not as great as doing a mitzvah. Why is that? Think about it. The godly soul was in heaven, right? The godly soul was in heaven. In heaven, the godly soul is cleaving to God. The godly soul is cleaving to God. Comes down to this world, it's dark. I don't see God, right? So it really wants to cleave to God. It tries to pray and tries to meditate and tries to connect to God on a spiritual level. But we're saying, no. You got to get involved in the materialistic world. You got to elevate the world. So what are we saying? That what's really important? What's important is the action. So if the action's important, so is that more important than my spiritual journey? In other words, like this, we always struggle. I want to be like in a spiritual high. What happens when you're on a spiritual high? By definition, you disconnect from the world. Here we're saying, no, don't disconnect from the world. Get involved in the world. But the reality is, when you get involved in the world, what happens to your spiritual high? It goes away. So the Alter asks a simple question. Why is that? I mean, if you have a choice, right, to be on a spiritual high or to be involved in the materialistic world, hey, a spiritual high is a spiritual high. But now we're saying, no. Even though it might look, a spiritual high really is that's where you were and that's where you'd like to stay, but you were put down to this world. So the Alter asks a simple question, what for? What for? The question is even deeper, because ultimately, where were we before the soul came down to this world? Where was the soul? In heaven, cleaving to God. It comes down to this world, in this whole dark world, so that we should do a mitzvah. What's going to happen at the end? God's going to be revealed. So if we started with God revealed, the end God's revealed, who needed this whole crazy process in between? What's the point? What's the purpose? And the Alter answers, and he says something very, very profound. And he says, like, I'll tell you in Hebrew, and then I'll translate and I'll explain what he's saying. And he said, this is 3 words. Soid, Galut, Hashchina. The secret of the Shechina, referring to God, being in exile. Now, what kind of answer is that? What was the question? Before the soul came down to the world, it was on a high one with God. It comes down to this world, it's dark, and it's trying, it's struggling, doing the mitzvot. What's the end? Back to square one. God's revealed. So what was the purpose of this whole in between? Now usually when you get involved in the business, right, it's to make a huge profit. We started out with God being revealed. We're ending up with God being revealed. And in the whole middle of craziness, God revealed, not revealed, struggles, challenges, pain, suffering. Who needs it? What's the answer? That's the secret that God's in exile. What kind of answer is that? What kind of answer is that? So the Alter explains like this. What does it mean that we say that this is the secret of God being in exile? What does it mean? What does it mean the secret of God being in exile? What does it mean the secret of God being in exile? What does that mean the secret? So the Alter says it like this.
I'm totally confused.
Exactly. What is a secret? What does a secret mean? A secret means like this. When we operate, there's 2 ways we operate. One way we operate is intellectually. If I ask you, what's the reason why this is happening? So you can give me an intellectual response. I mean, sometimes yes, sometimes not. So there's many things that when you go through in life, you have questions, logical questions, you get logical answers. And usually things make sense. Or at least they're supposed to, at least, right? Now, what happens if I ask you a question and you don't give me a logical answer? I don't have an answer. So what's the reason for it? And he said, listen, do me a favor, accept it. I can't explain to you, accept it. What kind of answer is that? So the Alter says, that's what is called, basically, I'm not giving you an answer, so really the answer is a secret. So when is the answer a secret? What does it mean when I tell you something's a secret? A secret means I can't explain it. If I can explain something to you, so I explain it to you, you have the answer. When I can't explain something to you, that means the answer is a secret. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm trying to keep a secret from you. The fact is the answer is a secret. What is the definition of something when something's a secret? It's above logic, and it's not rational. It's almost like that concept of faith. Right? Faith is logic? No. What's faith? Logic ends, that's where faith begins. So the Alter says, you're right. You have a very good question. God is revealed, the end will be revealed. This middle of getting involved in the concealed world and trying to overcome challenges and obstacles, etc. You're asking a question, why? That's called a secret. We don't have an answer. There is no logical answer. It's above intellect. In other words, it's nothing that intellect could comprehend. Nothing that intellect could comprehend. In other words, the fact is, as we discussed in last week's chapter, God had a desire. True, at the beginning God's revealed, and yet the end of this whole production, God is going to be revealed. But he had a desire to create this concealment process. It's not logical, because logical is if you're revealed in the beginning, you're going to be revealed at the end, you run the show, why play this whole game? And the answer is, there is no logical answer. And that's why it's called, this is the secret of God being in exile. What does it mean, the secret? There is no logical answer. If we had one, we would tell you. We don't have one. Why? Because ultimately, why did this happen? Not because it makes sense to us, because God chose to do this, and therefore it was a secret, it is a secret, and maybe it will remain a secret forever, or maybe one day God will reveal to us. Okay, so that answers that one question. But back to the point. So what is the Alter bringing out? that since, what did we say? Ultimately, what is it all about? It's all about, at the end, God should be revealed. How will God be revealed? When we do actions, what God wanted, as He prescribed in the Torah, we will cause that God will be ultimately revealed when the Messiah comes. So based on this, the Alter Rebbe explains, and he says, that's why it says in the Talmud that there's no greater mitzvah than the mitzvah of tzedakah, charity. Why is that? And the whole Torah is compared, could be diluted to one mitzvah, the mitzvah of charity. Why is that? Because very simple. From all the things that we have in the Torah, ultimately, when a person gives charity, think about how the person got that, that mound of money. One of two things. Either he worked very, very hard, and everyone knows when you work, when you're really working, your mind is into it, your heart's into it, and sometimes you get all, you totally throw yourself in physically and spiritually, and you're totally you're totally involved. Totally, 100% engaged, maybe 110% engaged. So in other words, in order for you to earn that reward, which we call money, you have to engage 100%. So if I took a special magnifying glass, and I was able to look into the money to see what caused it to be earned, I would see every part of you in that money. So when you're giving away that money, if I had the right tool, and obviously God can see that, He sees, oh my gosh, the whole person's in there. The whole person's in there. And He gave Himself away. I mean, think about it. A person worked hard. Sometimes you scream, you holler, who knows what you do to get the money. And you took yourself and you gave yourself away. So in other words, when a person does that, what is in the mitzvah? Your whole self. That's if you really worked for it. But sometimes we all know, certain people, they win the lottery, they win an inheritance, whatever it may be. They find money, or some people, money comes easy to them. So why then is charity so powerful? The answer is very, very simple. Because let's even say they didn't, the whole life is not into it. But the reality is, with this money, they can go to the store, and they can buy food, they can buy drinks, they can buy things that will give them real enjoyment. So this money has the potential to give them life. Physical life, spiritual life, happy, whatever it may be. You can buy a lot of things that will give you fulfilled life. And you take that money that could have fed you, and you give that away to charity. Guess what? So you're giving away the potential for life for you. So either you earned it and every part of you is in there, or maybe you didn't earn it, but every part you could create value to yourself, real power, and you go give that away. Guess what? You gave yourself away. And that's when a person gives charity, money, to charity, you've elevated not only the money, but more importantly, now you actually elevated yourself. And as you elevate yourself, you know what happens? You elevate yourself and you elevate the whole world. Because we are all basically we're one. We're all one. And we're all here as leaders, so to speak, to the world, for the world. As it says in the Torah, in many places, that you should be a priest upon nations, right? You should be a holy nation. So when you go ahead and do mitzvot, you're elevating the money, the domem. You're elevating yourself, right? The medber. You're elevating yourself, and through that, you're elevating yourself. You're actually elevating what? The whole world. So now the Alter Rebbe says it's great, but the reality is we know that many times in the Talmud it says that Torah is one of the biggest mitzvot, and Torah is everything. So here we're saying it's charity. I mean, is it charity or is it Torah? What is it? And the Alter Rebbe explains that they're both true. They're both correct. What does that mean like this? Charity, as we said, has the power to elevate what? The charity, the inanimate object, has the power to elevate the physical part of yourself. And since ultimately, what does God want? What was the key word we used in the beginning of the lesson? God wanted to make a ďira betachtonim, a dwelling place where in the lowest parts of the world, that means in the inanimate objects, or the lowest part, the coarse part within you. So therefore, when a person ultimately does a mitzvah of charity, materialistic mitzvah, he's elevating himself physically, and he's elevating the inanimate object, the money, and you're elevating the world. But, on the other hand, when a person sits and studies Torah, so what happens when you're studying Torah, you are drawing down God and godliness into you. Which part of you? Your thought, your speech, your intellect. And when a person draws in godliness through Torah study into you as a human being, that is extremely powerful because that gives you the light and that gives you the clarity to be able to do mitzvot. So in other words, yes, ultimately, what's the goal? Absolutely to do mitzvot. Because by doing a mitzvah, for example, the mitzvah of charity, you're elevating the money, you're elevating yourself. And that's what God wants, to have a dwelling place in the lowest parts of the world, so when the Messiah comes, guess what's going to be revealed? Godliness in every part of the physical world. Because when the Messiah comes, every part of the physical world, you're going to see God and godliness. But in order for us to have the power to do it, we need to study Torah. Because when a person studies Torah, you know what happens? You have the light upon yourself. And based on this, the Alter Rebbe explains a very, very fascinating piece of Talmud. The Talmud says as follows. That, let's say, for example, a person sitting and studying Torah. Sitting and studying Torah. And all of a sudden someone knocks on the door and says, guys, you know what, there's a mitzvah. Somebody got stuck and we need to help them. We need to help them. So there's a debate in the Talmud. Do you stop studying Torah to go help and do a mitzvah? Or do you say, you know, listen, we're studying Torah, why don't you find someone else to do the mitzvah? Right? What should you do? And it boils down to a simple question. What's more important, Torah study or doing mitzvot? And the Talmud answers like this. Obviously, it's a Talmudic answer, so there's always going to be like an interesting twist. Talmud says like this. It's not going to be clear. It's not going to be like a clear cut, I mean. It's going to be clear, but it's not going to be clear cut. There's going to be variables. Talmud says as follows. If there is nobody else to do the mitzvah, the guy, is anyone else outside? Nah, you know, it's 9:30 at night. The street is quiet. Everyone's sleeping. No one out. We're out here, and you know, I don't see anyone inside. This guy's really in trouble. So there's no one else. Guys, class over, or at least taking a break, go help the guy. Let's go help the guy. Why? There's no one there. But what he says, you know what, the truth is there's a bunch of guys actually playing in the playground. No problem. Go ask them. If they can do it, wonderful. We'll sit and study Torah, you do the mitzvah, and all the bases are covered. If they're not willing to do it, then obviously we'll come. In other words, what does that mean? If mitzvot are more important, then you should stop what you're doing and go do the mitzvah. If mitzvot aren't important, then why are you even running there? Torah is more important. And based on this, the Alter explains very simple. That ultimately, what's the ultimate goal? To transform the world. Now, that's the ultimate goal. But we also need the spiritual light of God, which comes through Torah, that gives us the power to be able to transform the world. So therefore, if there's other people to do the mitzvot, so ultimately if there's other people to do the mitzvot, it's not important that I do it. The important part is that the world should be elevated. So there's a group of guys playing basketball, and let them go elevate the world, and we'll continue to bring light into the world. So we're hitting and they're both important. But what happens if there's nobody out there? And guess what? So at this moment, you have a choice. Do I bring more light into the world, which is great, or do we go elevate the world, which that's what ultimately God wants to see at the end when the Messiah comes? Since ultimately it's all about transforming the world, and there's no one else to do it, then stop what you're doing, do the mitzvah. But if not, obviously, then if we have someone to elevate the world, then you continue to study Torah. And that's why it's interesting is that it says that Torah is called, we call it, you know, someone that's Koreh, someone that reads the Torah. Koreh also means calls. And when a person studies Torah, it's like dialing up God. Hey, send me some more energy. So when a person studies Torah, what are you doing? God, hey, send me that. And guess what? God sends you powerful energy. But once He sends you the energy, what's ultimately the purpose of the energy? To be able to what? To be able to transform the world. So just to recap, you see this is such a powerful chapter because this chapter lays out for you almost like your mission and your vision for your journey in this world. That ultimately in this world we have an opportunity to invest in CDs that will be guaranteed to be paid when the Messiah comes. Yeah, spiritual CDs. Not like the ones here that, you know, the bank goes bankrupt and all the other scandals, right? But the real CDs, when your person in this world goes ahead and does a mitzvah, right? Whether it's the Domem, Tzomach, and Chai, and the Medber, when any kind of person does a mitzvah, you are creating, God should be revealed in the materialistic world, and guaranteed it's going to be there for you when the Messiah comes, and when we resurrected from the dead, we're all going to be able to benefit from God really being revealed, and we'll be able to see that the effect of all our work in this world. that doesn't mean, but even though that the important thing is the mitzvot, it's still important to study Torah, because by studying Torah, we bring light into our thought, our speech, and our intellect. And by doing that, eventually, we will be able to continue to have the energy and the proper vision and the proper thought process to elevate the world. But what's interesting is I want to finish with one interesting note, that the Alter Rebbe says that ultimately, even though by Torah study a person has the power to think Torah and to speak Torah and to intellectually comprehend Torah, and that creates a certain refinement to our mind, our thoughts, our speech, and our intellectual process. But ultimately, our animal soul, our real animal soul, remains an animal. And therefore, if we don't tame that animal, we're going to be in big trouble. Because we can, as we study Torah, because the reality, for example, while you're studying Torah, your animal's at bay, it's not bothering you. But the problem is, the minute you stop studying Torah, you know what happens? Right now, you're not studying Torah, so you're not thinking Torah thoughts, you're not intellectually engaged, and all of a sudden the animal starts taking over, and you can end up doing things that you'll be surprised. I did that? Oh my gosh. It's not because you're bad or good. Even when you were studying Torah, your animal was the same animal. The only difference was that you were engaged with your mind and your thoughts, so therefore he was at bay. He wasn't bothering anybody. So you see how important it is to constantly and consistently study Torah, unless you're really busy with something else productive. Because the minute you're not going to study Torah, you know who's going to take over? Your animal soul. And animals are animals. And you don't want to have to clean up the mess of the animal for no reason. So make sure, obviously, to continue in the path that Alter Rebbe sets out. Study Torah. It'll keep your mind, your intellect, and your speech engaged in God and godliness. It'll draw down light on your life, and you'll be able to transform the world in a real way. And when Moshiach comes, we're going to have all the work that we did in this world going to be waiting for us. And the last thing you want is when Moshiach comes, there's nothing to show for yourself, right? So invest now in the future with a rewards. You like to see the idea, right? With rewards that are going to be there for you and each and every one of us. Thank you for joining.
And I like